The three great missions of David. Number 1. Slaying the lion and bear. Before David was king, he was already carrying out essential missions that would define his kingship. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 34 through 37. But David said to Saul, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and attacked it, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. And when it rose up against me, I seized it by its whiskers and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted and defied the armies of the living God." David had lived with God. Throughout many solitary days, he had kept his father's flock among the lone hills of Judah, and had worshipped the unseen but ever-present Lord. As a young lad of 15 to 17 years, while talking to the king of Israel, he claims to have already killed such ferocious creatures. This showed his profound responsibility and bravery. Mountain lions are elusive creatures. They are seldom seen. Usually when there's a story about an encounter, a human sees one and gets away because they followed their instincts. Or they raised their hands above their head and made loud noises to convince the lion to go bother somebody else. Number 2. Killing Goliath. The most notable battle portrayed in the Old Testament was not fought between two infantries, but between two people. It was the battle in the valley of Elah between David and Goliath. The Philistines were the Israelites' foes, and they were gathered for war at this time. It was not long ago that the Philistines were thoroughly beaten, but here we have them making head again. They descended upon the land of the Israelites, and it appears they took possession of parts of it, for they camped in a Judah-controlled area. The valley of Elah was more like a large canyon than a tiny valley. The ancient site was probably a mile broad. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 4. We need to understand precisely what that information means at face value, because we don't measure things by a cubit or a span. We count them by feet and inches. To make it easier to comprehend, let's simplify it. Goliath was an enormous man, approximately 9 feet and 9 inches tall. His size became even more intimidating when he raised his arms above his head. However, it was not just his height that made him imposing. He was clothed in what we would call a mail coat. The Philistines prepared for combat by wearing a sizable canvas-like undergarment with overlapping bronze ringlets. This coat of mail covered and protected the wearer from the enemy's weapons from shoulder to knee. The body armor of this type and size weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze, or between 175 and 200 pounds in modern standards. Only the coat of mail was included in the armor. Goliath, on the other hand, was equipped with a bronze helmet, bronze leggings, greaves, to protect his shins, and a bronze javelin or spear slung between his shoulders. His spear's head alone weighed 600 shekels of iron, or roughly 20 to 25 pounds. According to the written account, he had a shield carrier who marched ahead of him. The Hebrew word employed here refers to the largest battle shield, which is the size of a full-grown man. It was unmistakably designed to shield his body from opposing arrows. So, in addition to his body armor, Goliath had this guy racing in front of him, wielding a man-sized shield for further defense. Pause for a moment and allow your mind to picture such an imposing sight. Imagine how frightening it would be to take on a giant of this size, protected by this amount of armor. The odds are stacked against anyone foolish enough to face him in battle. Notice what this giant warrior did. Goliath suggested a strategy popular in the Eastern civilization, namely, representative combat or a one-on-one conflict. He'd be the Philistine army's representative, while Israel's choice would be the Israelite army's representative. The winner's army was victorious, while the loser's army was defeated. There's no reason for your entire army to be involved in this. Just send a fighter and I'll take him on. I am the champion. I am the greatest. Goliath didn't issue this challenge one time and then leave. No, his challenge went on for 40 days. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 16. For well over a month, he marched out there every morning and evening, flaunting his size and his strength, daring someone to challenge him. David was not planning on fighting. His father had sent him to bring his brothers some refreshments and express his concern. The sun rose like any other morning for David and Goliath that day. There was no prior notice, but the truth is that the 41st morning of Goliath's challenge would be his last, and David's heroic life would begin. It was not announced. Goliath, today you are history, or David, this is your day, by an angel from heaven. David got up early the next morning and did precisely what his father had advised him to do. He left his flock of sheep with another shepherd. Then, as he approaches the Israelite camp's outskirts, he notices the troops preparing for battle and hears the war cry. He just wants to watch and see what happens. David quickly made his way to the battlefront to greet his siblings while entrusting his belongings to the baggage attendant. Consider the situation. When David is standing there conversing with his three brothers, he hears a loud cry from across the valley, and suddenly, everyone in his immediate vicinity is racing to the back and crawling inside their tents. Please keep in mind that David is not aware of the Gath giant's challenge. All he sees is a heavily armored man who appears to be very large, shouting threats and insults while looking across the battlefield and cursing the God of Israel. And this infuriated David. Remember now, this is the 41st day the Israelites have encountered Goliath, but this is the first time it's happened to David. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" And the people answered him in accord with this word, saying, "Thus it will be done for the man who kills him." 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 26 through 27. A bride, vast wealth, and a tax-free life don't seem so horrible, do they? Even yet, it wasn't enough to elicit a volunteer. The people in David's immediate vicinity informed him about the incentive strategy, which included a variety of external motivations. David then meets with King Saul. Then Saul clothed David with his military attire and put a bronze helmet on his head and outfitted him with armor. And David strapped on his sword over his military attire and struggled at walking, for he had not trained with the armor. So David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, because I have not trained with them." And David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, that is, in his shepherd's pouch. and his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. So here's David, dressed in his most basic shepherd garb, and armed with his most basic shepherd weapons, his sling and staff, ready to fight. Then there's the turning point. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield-bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 41 through 46. Imagine the possibilities. David stood unfazed in the face of this enormous creature. All David had was a sling and a stone against a giant wearing 200 pounds of armor. There was a whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. One stone shot through the air with a whoosh, 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 and that was the end of it. Goliath was crushed like a bag of rocks. After that, the Philistines didn't hang around. They split the scene when they realized that their champion was dead. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Shaaraim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 52 through 53. Then David brought the head of the Philistine to Jerusalem. When it came to Goliath's weaponry, David had to use Goliath's sword to slay him. He put his weapons in his tent. He hid his weapons in his tent, says the narrator. They stood there silently as trophies. Facing giants is an intimidating experience. With perfect perspective and a safe distance of 2,000 years, we can look back on David's daring and victory. But even with the eyes of faith, consider what it must have been like to face the intimidating presence of that brute. Yet David said, "My God is greater than he." Trusting God provides a sense of security. David brought down Goliath with the first stone. His aim was accurate, and he did not miss the target. His faith in God kept him grounded. You will be unable to defeat the giant if you attempt to do so in person. When you have spent sufficient time on your knees, it's remarkable how stable you can be. Number 3. Bringing back the Ark of Covenant. David and the Ark of the Covenant. The scene is set in Jerusalem, and David, as you may know, is the reigning king. He is, in fact, a new king. His predecessor Saul is no longer alive, but the consequences of Saul's actions continue to reverberate throughout the kingdom. The Ark. Understand that the tabernacle, not the believer, was the focal point of worship in David's time. The emphasis on the tabernacle waned throughout Saul's weak and careless reign. During this time, a piece of holy furniture had gotten separated from the tabernacle. If you can believe it, the enemy had carted off the Ark of the Covenant. To today's Gentiles, that doesn't signify much. But in those days, the ark's loss meant that God's presence had departed, because the Lord dwelt in his glory upon the ark of the covenant. The ark was so precious to the Lord that he instructed Moses to build it and make it portable, so that the Israelites might carry it through the wilderness and into Canaan, as the principal place of worship. Since it represented the presence of Jehovah, it was the holiest place on earth. Now, when David took over the throne, he realized that there was no Ark of the Covenant, no central place of worship. As a result, the people of Israel's spiritual journey had become mediocre. Their heart was anything but hot after God. David, as their leader, understood he had to return that treasured piece of furniture to its proper position. He needed to set everything up the way God intended. Even to the point of locating a small piece of furniture and placing it in a specific location, his heart was set on God. When it came to God, David believed that no detail was unimportant. 2 Samuel chapter 6 tells how we got the Ark of the Covenant back in Jerusalem. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verses 1 through 5. Now David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David departed from Baale Judah, with all the people who were with him, to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name, the very name of the Lord of armies, who was enthroned above the cherubim. They had mounted the ark of God on a new cart, and moved it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were leading the new cart. So they brought it with the ark of God from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, and Ahio was walking ahead of the ark. Meanwhile, David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord, with all kinds of instruments made of juniper wood, and with lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. So here's David, rejoicing and celebrating and having the greatest delightful time, knowing that the Ark of the Covenant was coming back home where it belonged, in Zion. There was the sound of music, and there was the delight of obedience beating in the heart of David. The Ark is coming back! Hip hip hooray! Or conceivably, Shalom, shalom, shalom. To be sure, this piece of furniture was holy. It was set apart to God. So careful was God with his instructions about it, that he even told him how it was to be carried. A gold ring was attached at the base of each of the four corners, and gold-plated poles were threaded through these rings to carry the entire chest, ensuring that no human hand ever touched the ark itself. God further commanded that only Levites were to handle the tabernacle furniture, and that the poles would be carried on their shoulders. God cared about every detail of their worship, including how the ark was moved from one location to another. And it is there that David got himself into trouble. You see, David was a practical kind of man. He was a practical person. David was the king and the one who made the decisions. He understood that the people require the Ark of the Covenant to worship. The quickest and most efficient way to transport the Ark of the Covenant down the hill from Abinadab's house was via cart. So David ordered them to get a new cart, place it underneath the chest, and tell a few men to haul it down to Jerusalem. So they're bringing it down this way, with Uzzah and Ahio, two of Abinadab's sons, guiding the cart, when something terrible happens. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verses 6 through 7. But when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out toward the ark of God and took hold of it, because the oxen nearly overturned it. And the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and God struck him down there for his irreverence, and he died there by the ark of God. Uzzah stretched out to save the ark from tipping over. He didn't do anything else. Wasn't that, after all, the reasonable thing to do? You have to grab it rather than letting it slide off the cart and perhaps shatter or bend it, right? Well, what's right? Let me tell you what's right. It would not have been in jeopardy if they had carried it exactly as God had instructed. Remember how the Levites carried the ark by sliding the poles through the tiny ringlets at the bottom of the chest. The bars were to be placed on the shoulders of these specially selected men to balance the holy chest as it was moved from one location to another. David, on the other hand, did not do so. He picked a convenient path and altered the details to suit the hour's needs. Never do something that isn't right. Only do something once everything is in order. Then go for it with everything you've got. That is sound advice. But David said, "We need to get it down here. Who cares how we do it, so long as we get it here?" God did. And to prove it, he took Uzzah's life. Now here's David, standing alongside a corpse, and he gets mad. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 8. Then David became angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah, and that place has been called Perez Uzzah to this day. Having a heart for God doesn't mean you're perfect. It means you're sensitive. It means every detail is important. And when you realize you're incorrect, you own up to it. You own up. You come to terms with it. Verse 9 says, "So David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, 'How can the ark of the Lord come to me?'" The issue was that David had failed to complete his homework. We frequently get into problems when we don't do our homework. When we believe we can see very clearly what the Lord's plan is, and so we rush off to do it our way out of expediency or convenience, typically in a hurry. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 10. And David was unwilling to move the ark of the Lord into the city of David with him. But David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. 3 months have gone by. There is no ark in Jerusalem, and David's stomach is churning as he wonders what is going on. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 12. Now King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has, because of the ark of God." So David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. Now, hold on a second. He didn't touch it. However, it is said here that he brought it up. Why wouldn't he touch anything a few verses ago, but a few verses later he will? What went wrong? Well, one of David's counselors, no doubt, or the Lord himself, spoke to David and said, "You know the law specifically states, before the ark or any furniture can be moved, it has to be moved a certain way by a certain group of people." And David, who is hot after God, reacted. All they had to do was put the poles upon the shoulders, and you have to let the Levites carry this thing. And then you could move the precious ark of God. And being a man after God's own heart, David gets it. He had previously just hurried out there to finish the job, and he had been burned. What is the main point of the poles and ringlets? And undoubtedly, the Lord isn't interested with such intricacies. Wrong. If God cared enough to write it and preserve it, He cares enough about the specifics to have you and me carry it out exactly as He intended. And that's exactly what David did in the end. David was indeed remarkable. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 13. And so it was that when those carrying the ark of the Lord marched 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened steer. He's a man after God's heart. He is concerned with what God is concerned about. And when he heard the truth, he desired to follow God's instructions. 6 paces, fatling. 6 paces, fatling. Finally, they get the ark into Jerusalem, and look at what David is doing. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verses 14 through 15. And David was dancing before the Lord with all his strength, and David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with joyful shouting and the sound of the trumpet. When you mention David, most people will immediately make the connection. Oh yes, David and Goliath. Alternatively, people will see David as the man who committed adultery with Bathsheba. When some people hear the name David, they recall Samuel anointing him as king when he was still a youngster. Some people envision David as a warrior, or consider the story of David and Saul, or consider David's deep and enduring friendship with Jonathan. None of those traits, however, are what God remembers about his faithful king, his man, his choice. If you want to see what God remembers about David, you'll have to turn to the New Testament, the book of Acts chapter 13 verse 22. After he had removed him, he raised up David to be their king, concerning whom he also testified and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will. What a commemoration! It wasn't, I found David to be a faithful shepherd, or I found David to be a great warrior, or I found David to be a brilliant king. None of those things. It says, I found David to care about the things I care about. He is a man whose heart beats in harmony with mine. Whenever I look to the right, David also looks to the right. Whenever I look to the left, David looks to the left. When I remark, I'm concerned about that, David responds, I'm concerned about that too. That's being a man, a person after God's heart.